She thought she was untouchable, but in 60 seconds her mistake would cost her everything. Oh, the sound came first. Clang, steel snapping like gunfire across the silent mountains. If you've ever heard bolt cutters slice through a chain, you know the awful finality of it. That was the moment it happened. The crack that didn't just break a lock, it tore open the downfall of Pine Valley's most feared HOA tyrant. Where are you watching from? Drop it below in the comments. I want to know how many of you have lived through these HOA nightmares yourself. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that expose the Karens, the power-hungry boards, and the unbelievable showdowns they never see coming. Because you won't believe what happens next. There she was, Victoria Ashworth. Red power suit, clipboard pressed against her chest like a weapon, that smug little half-smile curling as the chain fell to the dirt. In her mind, she'd just delivered victory. In mine, I watched a woman step directly into her own downfall. She thought she had control. She thought she was punishing me. But what was hiding behind that broken lock, what she had no idea she had just triggered, would shatter her kingdom in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. What could possibly be so devastating that one arrogant snip of bolt cutters could unravel years of her carefully built power? Stick with me, because by the time you find out, you'll understand why every neighbor in Pine Valley would never forget this morning. Most people think battles begin on fields of war or inside courtrooms. Mine started years before bolt cutters snapped across my driveway, with a man named Silas Brennan, my uncle, the family hermit who left behind far more than anyone realized. I'm Marcus Brennan, 45 years old, divorced, an electrician by trade, the kind of man who knows the smell of copper and sweat better than perfume or polished wood. Life hasn't exactly handed me easy wins. My marriage crumbled after a decade of working overtime jobs and missing too many birthdays. My ex-wife Linda reminded me often that wires don't raise a family. She wasn't wrong. By the time I packed my last toolbox, our daughter Emma was 15, struggling to decide if her dad was still a man worth looking up to. That question haunts me. Every bruise on my hands, every late paycheck, every mortgage delay, it all whispered the same doubt. Was I building a future for her, or just patching holes in a broken past? Then came Uncle Silas's will, a man who disappeared into the Rockies decades ago, labeled eccentric, whispered about at family gatherings, while others laughed at his mutterings about secrets buried in the land. I couldn't help but admire him. When his lawyer called and told me I had inherited 5 acres of Colorado mountain paradise, I couldn't believe it. After the concrete jungle of half-baked contracts and unpaid bills, the wilderness smelled like salvation. I cashed out my 401k, sold my city apartment, and loaded Emma's picture in the glove box as I drove toward pine peaks that cut the sky like blades. This cabin wasn't just about fresh lumber and log walls. It was about redemption. But here's the question I couldn't escape. Would building this cabin finally prove to Emma I wasn't the failure she thought I'd become? Or would the HOA's claws sink in before I could even lay the foundation? Because Victoria Ashworth, clipboard queen of Pine Valley, seemed determined to make sure my fresh start became just another failure story. And that was the one thing I couldn't let happen. You can usually hear trouble before you see it. In the mountains, that silence is sacred. Wind rustling through pines, creek water tumbling over stone. But on the 3rd day of construction, trouble announced itself with the low, expensive purr of a German-engineered engine. A white BMW X5 rolled up my gravel drive like it owned the place, crunching pine needles beneath tires that had never seen a dirt road before. The door opened with the dramatic finality of a courtroom gavel, and out stepped Victoria Ashworth, the person who would soon turn my life into a war zone. Mid-50s, perfectly tailored red pantsuit, heels at least 2 designers too expensive for this terrain. Her perfume hit like a floral grenade against the pure mountain air, cloying, artificial, suffocating. "Are you the individual responsible for this unauthorized construction?" she asked, drawing out individual like it tasted bitter on her tongue. She didn't wait for an answer, already flipping through a leather portfolio bristling with printed covenants and violation slips like some suburban executioner. The way she looked me over, calloused hands, flannel shirt, boots caked in dust, wasn't curiosity. It was contempt, the glance of someone who'd already decided what I was worth. "This violates multiple community standards," she continued, voice sharp enough to cut timber. "No permits, no architectural review, no environmental assessment. Frankly, this rustic shack threatens our property values." I glanced past her at the endless wilderness, stretching far beyond the line of sight. "What community?" I asked, my voice low, taken aback by the audacity. Her smirk widened like a blade twisting. "The Pine Valley Homeowners Association governs everything you see here, and now, Mr. Brennan, we govern you too." What she failed to realize was simple. The papers she was waving like weapons weren't shields at a bada. Oh, they were cracks in armor about to split wide open. So the question became, would she destroy me before I uncovered the truth, or would her own arrogance write her downfall? The first notice came in the form of an envelope boldly stamped violation. No context, no warning. Just a $2,500 fine for unauthorized structural development. I laughed at first, thinking it had to be some clerical error, but the second envelope arrived the next day, then the third, each more severe, each more threatening, each dripping with the smug authority of Victoria's perfect cursive signature at the bottom. Soon the paper assault became a full-blown siege. My mailbox didn't hold friendly letters anymore. It was a weapon delivery system. Fines doubling weekly, threats of liens against my land, demands for demolition, each one carefully designed not just to strain my wallet, but to dismantle my spirit. The intimidation wasn't limited to paper. SUVs began parking across my driveway, never blocking, just sitting there with engines idling, hoods pointed at my cabin like cannons. Neighbors I'd introduced myself to days earlier suddenly stopped waving. A man who loaned me his hammer only a week ago now shook his head when our eyes met, as if even acknowledging me risked Victoria's wrath. Then came the smear campaign. A Facebook group suddenly appeared, Pine Valley Community Safety Watch. My face, pulled from a union newsletter, was plastered against phrases like dangerous outsider and transient criminal influence. Rumors spread faster than the creek running through the valley. Parents began keeping their children away from the road near my property. Contractors who'd agreed to help with the cabins stopped showing up, citing other jobs. Even the local hardware store clerk, once chatty and warm, now served me in clipped sentences while avoiding eye contact. Victoria didn't just want compliance, she wanted isolation. She was stripping me of allies one by one, boxing me in from all directions. At night, the intimidation took on new forms. Hazard signs appeared along my access road, fresh and official looking, contaminated work site. Keep out. My generator cables were mysteriously cut. Roofing nails, scattered across my driveway like caltrops, left my truck on 4 flats by morning. She wasn't content to bury me in paperwork. She meant to break me physically, financially, socially. Every tactic whispered the same message. You do not belong here. This is our world, not yours. But here's where intimidation always miscalculates. It assumes silence means defeat. In reality, I was watching, collecting, waiting. Each letter, each false citation, each suspicious encounter, it was all evidence. And if there's one thing an electrician understands, it's systems. Every circuit, no matter how complex, has a weak point waiting to be exposed. The question was no longer if Victoria would push too far. The question was when. Because the moment she did, the whole fragile web she spun around Pine Valley would collapse under its own weight, taking her crown with it. Hope doesn't always arrive with trumpets and banners. Sometimes it hides inside dusty file cabinets, waiting for the right moment to turn everything upside down. My lifeline came in the form of legal ink older than Victoria's favorite perfume. It started with a phone call from my sister, Emma's aunt, who reminded me that Uncle Silas was meticulous about paperwork. He kept every slip of paper like it was gold, she said. That night I found myself in his old workshop, the air heavy with the smell of motor oil and cedar. As I dragged out battered boxes stacked like forgotten tombs, I stumbled upon something that made every violation letter I'd received dissolve into irrelevance. Buried in those papers was the original deed from 1980, stamped and recorded. But it wasn't just the deed. It was a copy of the community's incorporation documents from when Pine Valley HOA was first created. The timing didn't add up. Victoria's HOA was only 6 months old. Silas had died 8 months ago, which meant he couldn't have signed anything binding me to their rules. My heart thumped. This wasn't just a loophole. This was legal dynamite. The next morning, I carried the documents to the county clerk's office. Betty, a woman who'd clearly seen her share of scandals in her 20 years behind the counter, adjusted her glasses and studied the files. She glanced up slowly, her expression halfway between amusement and pity. For Victoria. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "They trapped the wrong Brennan. Dead men don't sign contracts, and this deed carves you out clean." Her words landed like a hammer blow. For the first time in weeks, I felt wind in my lungs, real hope swelling against the weight of harassment. But the victory wasn't complete. Betty leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You've got leverage, but careful. People like her don't back down, they double down. And if she's tied to develop, meant money, oh, she'll burn the mountain down before admitting defeat." I walked out, clutching the papers like a soldier gripping his rifle. Yes, I had proof that she had no legal authority over me. Yes, I could challenge every single violation. But with every revelation comes risk. If Victoria caught wind that I discovered her scheme, she wouldn't fold. She'd escalate. And when cornered, snakes don't slither away. They strike. So the question lingered in the back of my mind as I secured the documents at home. Now that I finally had the power to fight back, how far would Victoria go to make sure I never used it? If there's one thing I've learned about bullies, it's this. The moment you show them they can bleed, they fly into a frenzy. And Victoria Ashworth was no exception. The ink on my discovery wasn't even dry before she unleashed the next wave. It began with a knock on my door. 3 uniformed officers standing in the morning sun, hands resting on their belts, expressions equal parts bored and wary. "Sir," one said, "we've had reports of unauthorized hazardous construction." He glanced past me, at the half-built cabin and the stacks of lumber, like he already expected to find a meth lab hidden under the floorboards. I produced the paperwork, the stamped deed, the exemptions. They nodded, polite, but their hesitation was clear. Someone with influence had put them on my doorstep. By afternoon, they weren't the only ones circling. I watched a county inspector pull his truck into my drive, clipboard in hand. He ticked boxes before even stepping out, snapping photos of lumber piles and power cords. "Orders from higher up," he muttered when I pressed him. "Not much I can do." His notes accused me of everything from improper waste disposal to septic violations, all fabricated. Paperwork designed not to win in court but to bury me under the weight of defending myself. And still, Victoria wasn't satisfied. That night, the smear campaign escalated. Flyers plastered around town painted me as a dangerous squatter with a history of violent outbursts. Parents in the hardware store pulled their kids close when I walked in. Even Emma called, her voice shaking, asking if her friends were lying when they said her dad was about to be arrested. Nothing cuts deeper than hearing your daughter doubt you, not because of your actions, but because of one liar with a megaphone. Neighbors who once exchanged polite nods began crossing the street, whispering behind garden gates. I became the Sai, or Pine Valley's boogeyman. And Victoria? She lapped it up. She strutted down the clubhouse steps like a monarch returning from conquest, daring anyone to challenge her word. Every tactic cornered me further. Fake charges, phantom rules, poisoned community opinion. I had evidence to fight back, yes, but evidence doesn't comfort you when your phone lights up at midnight with anonymous threats. That isolated cabin, once a sanctuary, began to feel like a cage tightening around me. But here's the thing about cages. They don't always hold the prisoner they're meant to trap. Sometimes, they're scaffolding for what comes next. Because as much as Victoria enjoyed imagining me broken, she had no idea that each inspector's note, each police report, each whispered rumor was being catalogued, logged, and stacked neatly like kindling. And kindling burns bright when the spark finally drops. Bullies thrive on fear. Victoria believed her smear campaign, her fake violations, and her borrowed policemen had me cornered. She thought she had broken me down to the point where I'd surrender my land and my pride just to stop the bleeding. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't defeated. I was waiting. Because if there's one thing my uncle taught me, it's this. You never swing until the timing guarantees a clean hit. The moment came on a brittle Thursday morning. The irony was that Victoria brought it upon herself. Another emergency community meeting, hastily organized, the agenda scrawled across her HOA notice board in bold red ink. Remove Brennan by force. Neighbors shuffled nervously into the drafty clubhouse, their whispers tangled between pity, fear, and exhaustion. Victoria strutted to the podium in her crimson suit, perfume clouding the stale air like she was baptizing the room in power. She launched into a tirade. Mr. Brennan is a danger to our property values, our safety, and our future. He owes $46,000 in accumulated fines and refuses to comply. Today, we decide his fate. That was my cue. I walked into the center aisle slowly, letting the weight of silence hold me. She smirked, lips curling like she'd already won. "Oh, Marcus, glad you could join us. Come to finally face the consequences." I held up a single manila folder. "Actually, Victoria, I came to show you what real consequences look like." I dropped copies of my deed across the front tables, original surveys, notarized signatures, incorporation dates that predated her entire HOA by decades. Gasps erupted from residents flipping through papers. Betty, the county clerk's certification glimmered in blue stamp. "Dead men don't sign contracts," I explained. My uncle had died months before her HOA inclusion documents were forged, which meant everything, every fine, every citation, every threat, was built on sand. Victoria lunged for the papers, shrieking, "This is fraudulent!" But the room had already turned. Whispers swelled like a rising tide. She lied. She never had control. Then I pulled out the second document, my ace, my attorney Sarah's sworn affidavit, filed with the county and resting in federal review. It detailed her fabricated covenants, her misuse of member dues, her campaign to intimidate every military and working family in Pine Valley. Copies were already logged with investigators. I looked her dead in the eye. You wanted me gone? That was your first mistake, because as of this filing, the only person at risk of being removed from Pine Valley is you. Her face drained of color. The queen bee of HOA hysteria left speechless. For the first time, the balance shifted. But here's the question still hanging in that room. What would Victoria do now that her carefully built kingdom was cracking apart in front of her own subjects? Showdowns don't always happen on battlefields. Sometimes they unfold on hardwood floors under buzzing fluorescent lights, with neighbors watching every twitch and stumble. And this was Victoria Ashworth's undoing, played out in the community center she believed was her throne room. The tension was thick enough to taste. Neighbors filled every chair and leaned against the walls, their voices a nervous hum that stilled the moment the county sheriff walked in, trailed by 2 federal investigators carrying briefcases. The air smelled of burnt coffee and fear, one scent familiar, the other quickly spreading across Victoria's face as she recognized the federal seals stamped on those folders. "Mrs. Ashworth," one investigator announced, voice steady and cold. "We've reviewed the documentation presented by Mr. Brennan. It appears your HOA has been operating under fraudulent covenants, collecting assessments without lawful authority, and fabricating violations against residents." The room erupted in gasps. Seats creaked as neighbors leaned forward, finally given permission to voice their doubts. One elderly man stood, clutching years' worth of violation letters. "You fined me $500 for an oxygen machine that kept my wife alive," he said, voice trembling with anger. Another woman rose behind him. "You threatened to foreclose on us for Christmas lights." More voices followed, a wave of grievances pouring out after years of silence. Victoria's polished poise cracked. Her red suit seemed to hang looser on her frame, her clipboard now shaking in her hands. She tried to retort, to spin the narrative, shouting, "Lies! All of it lies!" But for once, no one flinched at her tone. Then came the hammer blow. The sheriff produced a copy of the financial records Sarah's team had uncovered, documents Victoria had carelessly uploaded to her HOA Facebook group in a moment of arrogance. Nearly $800,000 collected in assessments, no records of improvements. Instead, payments routed to shell companies tied to your family. Silence. Then someone laughed, sharp and bitter, and the laughter spread, relieved, furious, triumphant. In desperation, Victoria tried one last card. "You can't touch me! I am this community!" she shrieked, voice breaking. But her allies, the very board members who once backed her every decision, had already shifted back in their seats, avoiding her gaze. One by one, they stood, not in solidarity, but in surrender. "We had no idea," one stammered. "We're done, Victoria." Her kingdom collapsed, not with dignity, but in disgrace. The sheriff motioned to his deputies. Federal hands flipped open cuffs that glinted beneath the buzzing lights. The sound of metal closing around her wrists echoed like justice itself. And as they led her past the very neighbors she had terrorized, not one person reached out to help. Instead, applause broke the silence, raw and defiant. The queen who ruled Pine Valley with fear had been dethroned in front of everyone. But here's the truth about power. When one tyrant falls, someone else is always waiting to fill the void. The only question left was, who would step up to lead Pine Valley now? When the echoes of that applause finally faded and the deputies escorted Victoria out of Pine Valley's community center in handcuffs, I realized something. This fight had never been just about me or one stubborn cabin. It was about everyone who had been silenced, fined, humiliated, or bullied into submission. It was about restoring dignity to people who had been scared of opening their mailboxes for years. In the days that followed, the air in Pine Valley felt lighter, literally and figuratively. No more violation slips stuffed into mail slots. No more SUVs staking out my driveway. No more parents pulling their children close when I walked past. Instead, neighbors stopped by with casseroles and stories. Veterans shook my hand. The widower who'd been fined for his oxygen machine sat across from me at the coffee shop, relief written across his tired face. For the first time in years, these people could breathe without the weight of HOA tyranny pressing down on them. Victoria, on the other hand, was finally facing the same rules she'd used to torment others. But this time, in a federal courtroom. Her fraudulent covenants, misused funds, and fabricated citations stacked against her like logs on a bonfire. Convictions for fraud and harassment weren't just rumors, they were certainty. It was almost poetic. She built her power on intimidation and paper trails, and now those same papers were burning her down. As for me, I finished my cabin. When Emma visited for the first time, she stepped out of the car, stared at the sturdy pine beams, the lake reflecting the afternoon sun, and hugged me tighter than she had in years. "You did it, Dad," she whispered. "You didn't let them win." And in that moment, I realized all of this. The fines, the fear, the endless fight had been worth it. Not just for her respect, but for the renewed strength it put back into my own reflection, the moral of this story is simple but powerful. Bullies only win when we don't fight back. They thrive on silence and obedience. But when one person stands up, when the truth comes to light, the entire house of cards comes tumbling down. So let me leave you with this. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare, or been pushed down by someone who thought their title made them untouchable, remember, you're never as powerless as they want you to think. Sometimes the truth doesn't just set you free, it sets a community free. And now, I want to hear your story. Drop your HOA nightmare in the comments below. Subscribe if you believe bullies should always be held accountable. And hit that bell so you never miss another story of ordinary people rising against extraordinary corruption. Because this isn't just my fight, it's ours.